Welcome back to Melodic Minds, a podcast where we aim to explore interdisciplinarity in the process of music creation. Our podcast is hosted by us, Dr. Lynn Falconer and Dr. Beth Mills, two researchers in the field of aquaculture and infectious disease.
So today we're joined by Dr. Mark Holub, drummer, composer and band leader, originally from the US but now based in Vienna, with a stopgap along the way at the University of Edinburgh, where he gained his PhD in the creative music practice. Mark is most notably known as the band leader and composer for Leadbib, who were nominated for the Mercury Music Prize in 2009 and have now released 8 albums. Mark is also part of a number of other critically acclaimed musical projects, including Anthropods, who released their debut album in 2022, and Blue Blood, whose third album was shortlisted for the German Record Critics Award. If that wasn't enough, Mark plays in a number of improv groups, including a sax-based trio in Vienna and a classical improv ensemble by the name of Perlin Noise, and Ad Libitum, an improvising quartet. Mark's illustrious career has also seen him work as a composer for dance and theatre, freelancing with companies including the English National Ballet, and his research now focuses on band leading and group language in jazz and improvised music.
Mark, we're delighted to have you with us today. Lynn and I are particularly excited to talk to you about improvisation and integration of different voices and disciplines. Welcome. If I can just kick off really with, what does the term interdisciplinarity mean to you?
I think it can sort of mean more than one thing. I guess there's like the classic understanding of it, like more across disciplines. So like my work with dance, my work with film, and that sort of working outside of music. But I think in a wider way, and maybe this isn't like the classical definition as such, but this is more what I'm interested in, is working with people who have different backgrounds, different things to offer, and trying to find some sort of common ground between people. And that differs like on what the project is, how we find that common ground, and what that common ground might be. But I'm particularly interested in the sort of everyone bringing a bit of themselves to a project. So finding a way not to collaborate in the sense of I come as a leader and I tell people what to do, but rather finding something that really is a collection of everyone's input. And that can be both in the traditional interdisciplinary way of like working across disciplines like music and dance, which I've done a lot of. But I think it can be within a discipline of people coming from different perspectives. And I think that I've learned, this maybe isn't an academic answer as such, but I had children sort of 12 years ago. And I realized at that time that my world was really small in a way. I always interacted with musicians and artists of some kind, and realizing that the world is not like that, and that I can't take for granted that everyone has sort of the same opinions as me about things. Not that everyone in music has the same opinions, but I think particularly as time has gone on and the way the world has developed, people tend to think, okay, well, I'm a left-wing person, I must have this sort of opinion. And it was sort of refreshing to go, oh, wow, these people are really different to me and have really different backgrounds and really different thoughts on the world. And, you know, taking you out of your bubble. And that can be also in a work context of like, okay, this person approaches music really different to the way I would. Where can we find something that brings us together? Because that's going to bring something special out of me and something special out of them.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think stepping outside of your bubble to find completely different viewpoints to then bring everything together can really be where the interesting things happen and occur. I was curious how you sort of alluded to, this might not be an academic answer. Do you see any differences or similarities between those that are academic musicians versus non-academic musicians in their approach to projects, concepts, the way that they work?
I think this is still pretty new for me. I did a master's degree many, many years ago. So I haven't been in university since 2004. And then I went back into the PhD. So I had a pretty big gap, not really having much of a connection to academia, aside from master classes, which is sort of different. And it was actually pretty shocking sometimes at first, particularly people who weren't necessarily practicing musicians, but were musicians, they studied music at some point, of how unwilling some people felt to go for an easy answer. That sometimes, like the first time I ever went to a conference, there was a lot of things that were presented that some people would come up with this very complex logic behind it. And when I would say something, which I was sort of hesitant to do because I felt like a little bit of an outsider, and said like, the sort of musician perspective, it was just, I had the feeling that it wasn't always greeted with joy. It was just like, oh, yeah, whatever. Yeah, but let's get back to the real thinking, which is somewhat connected to this interdisciplinarity theme, right? The way that musicians are working and the way that academics within music are working can be really different. And I think that both sides have a lot to offer each other, but it can be so siloed and so separate. And trying to bring that together is not always that easy. But I think more and more musicians are getting PhDs and doing more stuff in, like practicing musicians, are doing more stuff in academia, which definitely starts to change things. I think there's a problem with artistic research that it fights for sort of legitimacy, I suppose. And it's tricky that means that sometimes, from my perspective, artistic research can be a bit like trying to make it too sciencey, I have this problem and I'm going to do duck to solve it, which in a way is the way we're working as musicians anyway, I think. But when it becomes too rigid, there's a question and here's the answer, almost like a quantitative approach to creating art. It doesn't really come up with the goods, But I think that there are people who are getting this balance of doing interesting research, but also producing an interesting musical output. I think that is a challenge, for sure.
A challenge, but a sweet spot if you can make it happen. I think that, as you're saying, that sort of validity of experience and background, like you were talking about the conference and coming from different perspectives, I think is a challenge across interdisciplinarity work that we encounter. Everyone thinks that their work is maybe the hardest or the most complicated, kind of want to assert that dominance in some way. I guess you can see both sides of that same coin, having been outside and coming back into the academic space.
I also think that that's a really interesting point, because if we are going to move things forward in innovation and see kind of new things, we need people with different backgrounds. It can't just be people who've always been very theoretical and come up through traditional academic pathways. It needs to be much more open and accessible to practitioners to come in and out of different research fields and kind of learn from that. And that's interdisciplinary, I think, kind of lends itself well to that sort of type of work. And on that, I wondered, you had quite a big gap from when you did your master's to going back to the PhD. What was the reason behind doing a PhD? What kind of sparked that? I want to go back and kind of go back into that more academic side of things.
Some of it was that it was COVID. I've been thinking about doing it for a long time. And I was particularly interested in this sort of group language because it was more of an artistic problem. And I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do or what the project was going to be. Even when I started, it was pretty vague exactly what the study was going to be and how I was going to do it. Partially because I didn't really know how to design a study, but also because I just didn't know exactly what my sort of viewpoint was going to be, what I wanted to learn about. And it wasn't actually until I started that I thought that sort of being a band leader was my interesting perspective. But yeah, so it was a combination. The actual thing that brought me back at that specific time was COVID, but also Brexit, because I have a British passport too, and I live here as a British person. I know it doesn't sound like it, but trust me. And it wasn't clear like what was going to happen. This was like right before the Brexit agreement, whether I would suddenly have to pay like overseas fees or whatever it was going to be. So it was like, okay, it's COVID. and it's Brexit. I'm just going to sort of jump in and do it. I went in because I wanted to sort of research an artistic problem, but without like so many expectations of what might come up. And what I did want to say is on this idea of like interdisciplinarity, or like having a wider group of people, different backgrounds. I listened to the Wreath Lecture series. I don't know if you listened to this.
Not familiar.
No.
Wreath Lectures is like a BBC lecture series where they get different sort of academics to talk about things. And one of them came from Edinburgh this year. One of the lectures was in Edinburgh. And he was talking about how we need a moral crusade to change the world. Like we need new moral ideas. He was talking about the abolitionists and saying like that the abolitionists are like sort of a model for small groups of people who can enact big change. And this guy, I can't remember where he was from. But anyway, he asked a question at the end of the lecture and he says like, how can you talk about the abolitionists and slavery and only talk about white people? And the guy, he didn't really have much of a response, I didn't feel like. But it was interesting way of framing it, of like saying, we have a problem now of the way people are connecting with each other and the way societies are developing. And this guy who's got this big platform is basically saying, we need to look to other white educated people from the past who were really good. And then if we can learn from them, white educated men from the past, then things are going to be okay. And it's like, wow. I don't even think the guy who was asking the question necessarily was framing it in that context, but it did sort of, because I wasn't sure what I didn't like about the lecture, but it was like, it feels somehow not hitting. And then it was like, yes, like, even though I agreed, like that morality could be in our lives, and maybe that he's right in some of the things he was saying, it's like we need to draw from a wider pool of people. And this idea that if we only pick the right white men from the past and use that as like a guide to the future, that hasn't been working. That hasn't been working for quite some time. Sorry, that's a bit of an aside, but just brought it into my head.
I think an aside, but really interesting. And actually, I wonder, with that in mind, if maybe we could talk a little bit about how you actually create your groups of people that you make music with, and how you find those different people that you collaborate with. I mean, how much of that is conscious trying to find someone to fill a gap, or having people that you meet that then it sparks something?
I think it depends a little bit on the project, but mostly it's about people who I'm into what they do. I think that they're interesting, not specifically for what I'm looking for, but it's just like, okay, I like what they're doing and I like them as people. And it's like I have a sort of spiritual connection with this person and a musical connection with them. And I think that for me, the interesting part about putting together projects is not about finding the right person to fit in this gap or whatever it is, but rather finding something that we can do together, which takes a lot more time and investment, I think, but it gives an ensemble or a project a sort of more unique sound world because it's a collection of different people's voices. And I don't want to be the one to say, oh, it needs to be like this. I want to get people together who are going to bring part of themselves to it. So I wouldn't say, for the most part, there's that much thought. It's finding people who really want to do it and who are willing to dedicate themselves to a project and say, I really want something to come out of this. And that dedication is what then drives something to come out at the end.
I think that's really interesting when it comes particularly to things like improv and how you can have a kind of shared vision, but not necessarily know from the start how that's going to get to the overall goal. I just wondered, from your experience in that, how do you take part in that part as a practitioner in that improv space, and knowing when enough is enough and you've essentially finished something? Or is it always a continuous, we could always do a wee bit more to contribute to something?
Some of that comes, I guess, from experience in the pure sense of length. That often when you're getting younger people to improvise, it's hard for them to stop because someone keeps going or whatever it is. And it's like, with time, you realize that was enough. This is a natural ending. It's much easier to find endpoints. I don't think that it's so sort of conscious how you do these things. And I think that different people within an ensemble's perspectives on that sort of stuff is pretty different. But I found this quote in my thesis. I can't remember who it was who said it. But he was saying that even if you can't understand, like even if we have a different perspective on what the color red is, the way that seeing blood makes us feel is the same, sort of. We have a different perspective on what the group language is or where we're going musically, but we're still in the same boat. We still have the same sort of feeling about it, even though it would be difficult for us to describe it to each other. Yeah.
Do you ever come across people that don't get it? Because, in the context of, we're all in the same boat, we all kind of innately know this is what we're doing, either through experiences or some sort of intuition. But is there some times where it just does not work?
Yeah, all the time. Also with people But I think definitely there's a lot of festivals and just club nights or whatever that exist that are sort of putting together people who've not played together before. And occasionally that's okay. Occasionally that works. But a lot of the time it doesn't. And because it's, at least from my perspective, I think a lot of the problem is that you don't understand the boundaries. You don't understand, particularly for me playing a loud instrument that can really dictate the sort of sonic vocabulary that people are able to use. You don't understand, is it okay if I do this? And then you start thinking too much when you're doing it, which is always a recipe for disaster. But that happens also with ensembles that do know each other. It's just the nature of it that sometimes it really works and sometimes it doesn't. And I think for me, over the years, I've gotten better at not getting stressed, not as stressed. Because in the moment of performing, when it's not going the way you think it should go, you can get, really in your head and think like, oh my God, I need to get off the stage. This is so bad. But it still is tricky to get yourself out of that place when it's feeling like it's not happening. And I liken it in a way to tennis players, because I think a really good tennis player, not that I'm particularly into tennis, but anyway, is able to, when they've lost like 1 million points, they're able to, still save 20 match points and then go on and win. Like they're able to refocus in the moment without a break and just go, okay, now I'm going to do this. And I think that in playing music and improvising in real time like that, it's so hard to do that. And I'm sure it's really hard to do that in tennis too. But I'm constantly trying to, when I'm feeling like, oh, it's not really happening, take a breath, listen, think about what I should play. I mean, I'm an overplayer. I play too much a lot of the time. And I think when you hear people who don't do that, someone in my ensemble, Anthropods, Susanna Gottmeier, she's a bass clarinet player. She is so good at not playing that everybody, when they hear Susanna, they go, oh, Susanna sounds so good. And it's like, she sounds so good because she only plays when she has something really good to play, which is obviously a good method for doing things, but it means that sometimes she doesn't play much. That's great that she's able to go, I don't have anything to add right now. And I think for me, and it's the same for me as a human being, that I can just blah, 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 when I don't really have anything to add. And sometimes I need to just shut up and stop. And it's hard to do that because you think, oh, the music's not really going the way it should go. Maybe if I do something, it's going to work. And once you start doing that, it doesn't, just like in conversation or connecting with people, it's the same way. sometimes it's not happening, and going on and going over and over it doesn't help. So yes, all the time it doesn't go well.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, that what you were just saying about Susanna and the restraint there and being carefully considered, and when she comes in. And I think that again is such a great ability to have within these groups, where you think, oh, actually, are we competing or coming together? Is it more successful if I'm playing the most or not? And I think you need that balance of people that will continue to go through, because that then sparks an idea or gives other people to have that breathing space to think and then come in again in a different way, because people will process things differently in the moment as well, pairing from that perspective.
Yeah.
I guess a lot of it also comes down to learning to work with each other, and how do different people operate, and how do they feel comfortable themselves, or what role do they like to take within a team. And a lot of it probably comes down to trust as well, that you trust that they will do what they need to, again, to come to that kind of common vision. And that, I guess that also takes, thinking from it from kind of a science perspective, is sometimes we race ahead to try and get the outputs and the success measures that we're used to. So something quite solid, a paper or something like that. And you don't necessarily give it the length of time that's perhaps needed to balance the team in a way that you could maybe create something that's even more special at the end of it. So there's probably some stuff we can all learn from sort of that music kind of science.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really good point, that when we have the trust, not just in each other, but trust in the process. I play in this trio, Blue Flute, which is like me on drums, a guitar player, and a woman who plays the theremin, this like early electronic instrument, that you play in the air. And Pam, she's great, but I mean, Krista's not a busy player, but I'm definitely a busy player. And sometimes it's like, we're rolling along, it sounds okay. And then I think, I don't really have so much more to add to what's happening. And I maybe stop or thin out what I'm doing. And then Pam comes with this stuff, and you just think, man, if I had stopped playing ages ago, she could have had the space to do this thing. And it's like so nice that she obviously didn't feel like she had that space, but it takes the ability to trust that it's going to be okay. Because I think that you can, or definitely I can as a musician, think, maybe it's a bit of an ego thing too. Like, oh, I need to make something happen. I need to show that I can do something, and I need to make it happen now. And actually, if you just say, okay, I'm just going to listen, I'm not going to be stressed, I'm not going to think that something has to happen, I'm just going to let it happen. And then often that's when the most interesting stuff happens in the music, I think. But it's hard to do that.
Absolutely. It's very difficult, because you want to see a product, you want to see something come out of that as well. I was wondering if the sort of space that you're in at the time influences how you come together and operate. So, for example, if you're recording a song, recording an album versus playing live, is the group dynamics different during those two kind of processes?
Definitely. Recording improvised music is very hard, I find. Because even though improvised music and jazz can have a small audience anyway, it's different playing it for an audience than playing it for a recording. And even like in COVID here in Vienna, there's a jazz club here called the Porgy and Bess that did a gig every night. So the club was closed, but it was a streaming gig every night. And you went in and you played it like an actual gig, and you were in the club. And it was really strange to play in a completely empty club with just the sound engineer and the owner of the club. But it felt like a concert, almost. So it had a different feeling than playing in a studio. There's something about having the feeling of, this is the only time we're going to do this. And we're not going to sit and listen to it and critique the things that we've done and make sure that we've done it right. It's very hard to recreate that. Even if you go in the studio and you're only recording something one time, sometimes that happens, but it's like, I know I'm going to hear this again. Or I know that it's recorded and it's going to come out and someone else is going to listen to it. It's very hard to not, sort of get thoughtsy about it. And I think this is actually in my thesis, that when we first did a record with Anthropods, we were trying to decide sort of how to record, because it's a weird collection of instruments, because it has cello and violin, but then drums and saxophone and bass clarinet. So ideally, from a sonic perspective, you'd have the strings in a separate space. But Clemens was saying that, and I mean, I agree with him, that, you know, if we had played together for 20 years already, we probably could fake it. We know sort of roughly the way we play and it would be fine. But because we're new at it, we really need to like be feeling each other in the space, which is what we ended up doing, because you need to have that connection in the room, because it's challenging, because it's hard. And it didn't mean that that session was easy, but it was easier than it would have been. It's just the studio is somehow a recreation of a live experience rather than a live experience, you know? And it's always hard when you're sort of faking it to a degree.
I think that, I'm just thinking that resonates really strongly with that, having to be there in person, especially when relationships or the process is quite new. Being there in person versus remotely, separately, or on screens is something that definitely I see advantages of in the way that we work in project creation and executing and delivering projects. Definitely the most interdisciplinary ones that I've been part of is when we've been co-located to bounce the silly questions off each other, try something, and it happens quite rapidly, rather than being separate. Everyone's kind of interpreted the same message differently, goes off on their own, tries to put it all back together at the end, and it's never quite as integrated. It feels quite similar to the experiences that I've had. Being in person is much better, and it's probably another thing that we've learned from the disadvantages of COVID and being separated so much.
Definitely. I mean, when I started the PhD, obviously it was COVID. So like even my supervisory team, I didn't meet them in person till year 3, maybe, end of year 2. So it's like, you know, I knew Raymond a little bit, like we had spoken before, like through music. Nikki, I didn't know at all. And it was like, I mean, we still found a connection, I think, but it's just strange. And maybe for kids now, it's not so strange, like to have that. But for me, you know, I'm not a digital native. So it was like, wow, this is weird. Like the first time we met, it's like, wow, we've been speaking for like 2 years and we've never met in person. It's like somehow weird.
Yeah, it's a strange thing. And I do think particularly we have learned a lot from that sort of COVID space. And I think in some ways, at least in my own work, I think we're coming back to those in-person meetings, even if they're short, are very valuable. And what you can learn from that to build that trust, also how you're working with each other. And again, it's much easier once you know somebody in person to fire off an email and say, hey, can you do this? Or hey, can you do that? Because you learn both the common language that you can speak, and it helps. I think it speeds up things in that space.
Yeah, definitely.
I was just wondering, kind of, when it comes to different aspects of sort of the music, maybe it's not even an issue, I don't know, but ownership and leadership as part of music project.
There is a trickiness in that sometimes there's money involved. So someone brings in a composition, should they be the sole composer when that goes to the PRS, like the Collection Society? It can be tricky. I usually just go with whatever one is going to be happy with. And, you know, for certain projects, it's like with Leadbib, we've always done it that whoever brought the tune is the composer on that track. Because, I mean, they are the composer, but they get the composer's credit. But then we did this record, It's Morning, that we collaborated with these 2 singers and this filmmaker. And I felt like this was more a band project. So I put to everyone, like, I maybe brought most of the tunes. I think we should, you know, all get publishing credits on it. It's not a lot of money anyway, but like it makes a difference to the way people feel about it, I think, sometimes. And it's often just done in the way that a band historically does it. But a lot of collaborative work, you sort of think that everyone thinks the way that you do, and they don't always. So now I'm starting to write some journal articles based on my thesis. And it's like, should I write it with my supervisors? Like, should they be named authors? It's like, I guess so. But then I feel like, oh, is that what I'm supposed to do? Are they like, you know, I don't really know the etiquette, and I'm happy with whatever. But I think that probably some people who are really on it with that sort of thing and say, like, this is mine and I made it, they probably go further than me. Like, you know, they probably have more success in whatever way. I think, you know, I've never been career focused. And I think that's really challenging for me now at 44, having finished this PhD. Okay, well, I guess I should think about my career. And that's what makes me realize, like, I've never thought about this before. I've never even, like, having to put a CV together and that sort of stuff. I never really had to do that. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't feel nice for me. It feels quite uncomfortable. And the idea of saying, oh, I've done this and I've done that. It's like, I've done this and that with the help of those people, you know?
I think it's interesting about that assignment of credit and what you need to take out of it. And sometimes maybe it's these external factors of thinking what's next that puts different pressures on different people that have some of these conflicts arise. Who gets ownership, who gets the front person for whatever it is that you're presenting. And I was just wondering, do you find successes look different to different people in the team working on the same project together? Like, does everyone have a different thing they're trying to get out of it? Or is it more a collective, we will be successful if we collectively reach this threshold, whether or not it's a publication or a nomination for something or then access to another? And does that ever lead to any tensions because people want different things out of what you're doing and putting together?
Yeah. Yes is the answer. That is a complicated thing, I think. First of all, I think that success is movable, you know, and changeable. And if, you know, you spoke to 20-year-old Mark and said, you know, you're going to get this Mercury Prize, you're going to be in whatever newspaper, it would have been like unbelievable, you know, that I would get any of that stuff. But the reality of it is, first of all, it's incremental. Nothing like changes your life overnight. But also you get, you know, oh, wow, I'm on the cover of Jazzwise. I never would have thought that's going to happen. Then it's something else. Like, oh, I wish this record got album of the year in whatever. The level of success of something or your perception of what successful is always changeable, obviously. But within an ensemble, that can be a tricky thing, I think, because for some people, it's just a matter of getting the music out there, and it doesn't matter what it does. And then for other people, it's much more, oh, we didn't get this thing, a sense of disappointment. And I think as a leader, it's very challenging managing your own feelings about something while trying to manage the feelings of others. I'm so happy we're doing this gig. There's only 10 people in the audience, but I can't wait to play, you know, or whatever. And someone in the band is like, oh man, there's only 10 people in the audience. Like, this is really a downer. Like, yeah, I can't believe we've been working so hard and this is all we've got. That hurts me too, because I know he's upset or she's upset. I want to support them, but I also want to not bring myself down. It is really hard to get that balance right. And I think, you know, I had a chat with someone from Leadbib at the end of this tour in the UK. And he was basically saying, like, every time I see a band play, I wonder why I'm not on that gig.
Oh, interesting.
He was like, not being totally serious, but somewhat serious, you know? And realizing that I have a completely different perspective to that. And even though we've known each other for so long, to have him spell it out like that was like, okay, wow. I am interested in being successful to the extent of I want to be able to do the things that I want to do. And having some sort of profile enables that to happen. Mm-hmm. But I'm not interested in success in that way of, you know, the success is a means to an end. It's enabling me to do things that I want to do. But I guess, like I said before, if I was maybe more focused on the success part, I might have more money in the bank. With 2 children and being 44, it's hard not having that much money in the bank eventually. And that sort of stuff, the situation for artists at the moment in Europe is not easy. And the situation in the UK is terrible. In terms of public funding for arts, it's really, really hard at the moment. And at least in the jazz scene, I can't really speak that much beyond that. But people are just sort of getting on with it because they have to. But it's really hard. And I think there is something, even though that's bad, and it's, I think the support of the scene is a vital part of culture in a society to support people doing creative pursuits. But sort of in a society, particularly in England, that I know better than Scotland, even though I did my degree in Scotland, clearly I wasn't there that much. Yeah. Not having the money and not being able to have the support actually brings people together. That they're like, you know what? Fuck this system. We're going to do it anyway. And that creates like a vibe that you don't get in a place like Vienna, where there's like money around. I come from New Jersey originally, and New York is the same, that it's like, there's no public money. I mean, there's public money around for lots of other stuff, but not for fringe arts. And it's like, well, we're going to do it anyway. And I think that creates like people come together in a way, like, you know, fighting the system as it is. And that's sort of a positive thing somewhat. Although I'd like the money too.
Yeah. But I suppose that sort of camaraderie and that common thing that you're pushing against brings that common ground in very quickly. And you meet people on that level there, and it becomes then problem solving and solutions of, well, we're just going to do it. It's a good motivator.
Yeah.
Although obviously we would like more money for everyone in the art space as well. But it kind of fast tracks some of that initial baseline of getting to know each other and find your people, maybe.
Yeah, 100%. And I think I got contacted by a guy in Manchester 2 days ago. And he was like, oh yeah, we're doing this gig. It's like a Bowie tribute, 10 years since he died. And we're getting people to write arrangements of tunes, and it's going to be played by this big band. And basically said, everyone's getting £20 to do it. And it's like, I mean, I said I don't think I actually have the time because it's a fairly big job and it's a short notice. But it's like £20.
Yeah.
But people are going, you know what? I care enough about this. I did music because I care about it. It's horrible that it has to be £20, but it brings everybody together and everybody goes, all right, we know that this is like not a great situation, but we really care about making this work, rather than having this group dynamic where someone is like, I'm doing this for the money. And someone is like, oh, I've got another gig in 10 minutes. Everyone is going, I'm turning up because we need to make this happen. You know, first and foremost, is because it needs to happen. And I think that creates a different vibe amongst people. And, you know, it's finding these people who are willing to not like work for terrible conditions, but rather like whose first and foremost thing is, I want to make something. And that's what it's really about.
I think it's also that laying your cards on the table at the start. This is what I'm doing and why. Or these are my boundaries. This is what I will not do because I've had other responsibilities and factors that cannot allow me to work in this way. So it's about setting that space at the start of anything as well, which I think is a really valuable thing to do.
Yeah. And it's harder to do with something that's constantly developing. So like, a band from university, it was okay in the beginning to sleep on someone's floor or like, you know, whatever. And then it's tricky as a leader too, to realize like what's okay now. Because like Leadbib, I ran since my master's degree. So that's 23 years now. If I went to them and I said, look, we've got this gig, we got to sleep on somebody's floor, but I think it's going to be a cool vibe. I think probably they would say, okay. You know, Mark, if you think it's a good idea to do it, let's do it. But it might be that they do it and they think, this is terrible. Why are we doing this? For me, I have to sometimes decide myself without asking them. Because they trust me, I hope, to not make them do something that's terrible. So if I'm going to go to them and say, let's do it, I had to take some sort of responsibility that it's going to be okay or that it's going to be worth doing. Yeah, that is tough with a band that's lasted that long, Whereas with another ensemble, like with Anthropods, I started that in the PhD, and it was clear for me, from a band leader perspective, I would make sure that they're all paid properly always. And that could mean that I don't get paid properly. Because we did a tour in England twice, actually, we came to England. And one time we did a tour with another sax player, Kath Roberts' band. And we applied for funding from Austria, and she applied for funding from the UK, and she didn't get any funding. So we had to sort of stretch this funding from Austria that was for 5 musicians to 10. And it was like, there wasn't a lot of money. So, but I had set up that culture that it was like, this is the way it's going to be. I'm going to pay these people and I'm going to lose money on it, which sucked for me. But it's like, it was clear that's the way it was going to be. There wasn't like a question for me about it.
Yeah, there's quite a lot of times today you've spoken about different things you've had to do as a leader. So there it's, sacrificing so that the team gets what they want. And earlier you were talking about, I guess, managing, hopefully making sure people are fulfilled in what success means to them by their definitions, when you're the kind of leader within the group and you're the one that can kind of direct how that happens. And I think is kind of relatable. So me and Lynn both have these Future Leader Fellowship grants, which means that we have been funded by UKRI to set up these research groups that are quite interdisciplinary. And we have, members of staff and students coming in. And again, we face this whole, how do you manage what different people need from the positions that they're in coming up and training? And it resonates quite strongly with what you were saying earlier, and making sure that the staff members get to go to the conferences and are funded properly and have enough training opportunities of their own to sort of have their own success, and setting a level of what everyone can have, so that they're not just there churning outputs with no bigger beneficial effect for them as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that there's, for me, I think that this works sort of cross-discipline, but there's something in leadership that your response to people needs to sort of be authentic to you. And I think, like, for me, I'm not a praiser. I don't say to people, that was so great. Oh, thanks so much. That's not the person I am. And if I started doing that, it would come across as inauthentic. So it's like the way that I'm showing, and this isn't just in leadership, this is the way I am with everything. And it has negative implications too. But it's like the way I'm showing my appreciation for people is doing things for them. So it's like, I'm making sure that everything is sorted. I'm giving them like a good tour with good itinerary, and like making sure that they're paid the moment the money comes in and all that sort of stuff. So it's like, authentic to me is that. That's the way that I am with my family too. Hopefully I show them a bit more love and praise than that. But it doesn't come that natural to me, because that's just not the person that I am. So it's like, for somebody else, leadership can mean something different, that using the skills that come more natural to them. And I think digging into a lot of this sort of leadership research, that it is a lot of white man research for sure. It's like this idea that we have to be a certain way, and this is the way you do things. And I think particularly in collaborative working, it's really not about that. And I think this idea that leadership has to mean something is not helpful. And it makes people feel, certainly in jazz, a lot of the people that I spoke to as part of the PhD were like, I didn't want to lead because I didn't see myself as that person. But they didn't see themselves as that person because they had this idea that leadership needed to be a certain thing. And then it's like the realization of, it doesn't have to be that. It can be what you are. You're bringing what it is that you're good at. And that might be completely different than what I'm good at or what somebody else is good at, but that doesn't mean that you're not a good leader.
Absolutely agree. I think that's a fantastic point. And I think that diversity of skill sets, diversity of leadership approaches, but ultimately being authentic to your true self. Because if you fake it or you try and be something that you aren't, people see through that very quickly, and you don't get the results that you would if you were being authentic, despite all the different ways that authenticity can actually come through. So I think that that's a really great point, and probably a nice way to sort of wrap up the conversation today about being authentic to yourself and developing in the way that you want to is a good approach for interdisciplinary work. Thank you, Mark. This has been excellent. It's a really enjoyable conversation.
Thanks for having me. It was nice to chat.
If we can just finish off, is there anything else you would like to say or mention some of the projects that are ongoing you would like people to
support? Anything, please. I'll be over in the UK in June time, not in Scotland, but we'll be in Newcastle. Not so far. Doing a tour with Leadbib. There's various sort of bits and pieces like coming up. I mean, if people look at my website, which is completely not up to date at the moment, but someday, I mean, January, there's not usually so many gigs. So it's like, now's my time to get it updated. So hopefully pretty soon I'll put some gigs. I don't think there's any gigs on there, but there will be.
Final question is there a piece of music that inspires or resonates with you, particularly from an interdisciplinary standpoint? Is it a piece of work that you've done yourself or something that someone else has done? It's quite a difficult question, I appreciate, to narrow down to one single piece of music, but I just wondered if there was anything.
I saw this question on the sheet and I wrote something down because I thought it would be impossible for me to answer that in the moment. That would be really egotistical if I picked a piece of my own.
No, not at all. It could have been the journey.
That was I think it was Louis Armstrong on Desert Island Discs, and he picked all his own music. Like 8 tracks of his own music.
What a wonderful world it is.
Yeah, exactly. You know, I've become a bit of since having children, I somewhat like emotional about kids doing weird things. That it's like, I'm so glad that young people are still doing weird stuff. And I went and saw this large group from Mats Gustafsson. He's a Swedish saxophone player in Vienna right before Christmas. And one of the sax players, Mette Rasmussen, she's a Danish sax player. She wrote this piece that was, I don't know if it's on a record or anything, but she wrote this piece that was using Greta Thunberg's speech to the UN and then sort of interweaving it with this big band, sort of avant-garde big band thing. Sometimes I think protest movements can be single issue and it's not seeing the whole picture. We definitely can have the feeling that when we're involved in that sort of stuff, is it really doing anything? But it was like, wow, these people really care, actually. And just to hear someone take this thing from outside of music, from this young woman who obviously really cares about the environment, and use it in her music and the music of this larger, like cross-generational ensemble, it's like, you know, it sort of brings tears to your eyes in a way, because it's like, you know, you can get the feeling of everything is so terrible at the moment. Sometimes it feels like it really is the reality. But it's like people do care and people are trying to do something. And that sort of, that just hit me at that time, you know, and like, that's the thing about music and that's something that we can lose in academia sometimes, that why did it hit me? I don't know, really. It's just the connection of all that stuff. And, you know, I remember when the middle of COVID, I was on, so they do, I don't know if you've ever been to Vienna, but they have a road that goes around the first district. And they always do like a bike parade every year. And I was with the kids doing this parade on the Riksstrasse, and we got to where the Urania Kino is, which is like by the canal. And there was like a samba band playing. It was like, you know, a crappy samba band, whatever. But it was like the first time I had heard live music in, you know, 1 year. And I was really like tearing up. It was just like, oh, it's so beautiful. Like, and, you know, it was somewhat like almost embarrassing because it's like, what is so beautiful about it? Like, it's like a crappy samba band, but it just hit so hard at that moment. We were talking about in our study group about, you know, embodiment in music research. Basically that, you know, a lot of previous musicology was like not about embodiment. It's about that music is like an intellectual pursuit. And to anyone who is not involved in musicology, the idea that music is not about embodiment is insane, I think. because like our connection to music is our whole body, its place, it's all that. Of course it's about that. Like, and yeah, we can lose that a little bit sometimes, because that's what's great about music, that it can just hit you and you don't know why sometimes.
Yeah, I think I can definitely relate to that. And I think that's a wonderful place to stop. Thank you so much for sharing everything today. It's been amazing to hear from you and to speak to you today.
Absolutely. It's been fantastic. And I do also encourage people to check out your website and your Spotify as well. I think you've a Spotify account for Leadbib where you can listen out to some of the songs, which are very good as well.
This has been Melodic Minds. Thank you so much for joining us today. This podcast is executive produced by Lynn Falconer and Beth Mills, and our producer is Perla Gomez, with sound engineering and mixing also by Perla Gomez. We are supported by the UKRI Future Leaders Development Network. Special thanks to our guests. If you enjoyed the episode, please rate, review and subscribe from wherever you get your podcasts. Drop us a message at melodicminds@gmail.com or find us on socials at Melodic Minds.